Welcome back. This is the Marketer of the Day podcast. Brian McCoach is here, and he's the host of Wild, Weird, and Sometimes Normal. That is a weekly podcast where each episode features insightful interviews with a diverse array of guests who are eager to share their remarkable experiences and perspectives from things like battling cancer, musicians and their music, spirituality, the enigmatic realm of cryptids, UFOs, and so much more. It is a podcast of randomness, which is what we like from podcasts, right? If you want a step-by-step, then go read an article, go on Medium or LinkedIn or something. Podcast is about randomness, and that includes this one, where Brian is going to tell us about what he does, his uniqueness and story, and so much more. So, Brian, glad to be speaking with you.
Hey, I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you so much for the invite. I think rarely am I a guest on someone else's podcast. I'm used to controlling this. So letting go, It's like this is a whole process right here.
It's an exercise in patience. It's always a bridesmaid, never a bride kind of, or something. And I'm similar, right? Like I've done over 1,000 of these, and I kick myself because I'm just like, man, I wish I was on like all these podcasts every week, but I'm sometimes like, I tell myself these excuses, like I have other things to do, but it's okay. The networking still happens. And as you say, you get to do it on your own terms, right? You're in my house now. So now that you're in my house, what are you all about? Just what's your focus, your passion? What gets you up in the morning?
So I'm a family man, so that's first and foremost. And before I start the podcast, I actually wrote a children's book series. It was self-published through Amazon, and it's called The Secret Missions of Logan Howard. And it's about a fourth grade spy. So this came about as I have a boring, budget, finance, Excel job that I stare at nonstop, and it's painful. So my son, he was probably, 6 or 7 years old at the time, and he's like, hey, Dad, what do you do? And I started explaining to him, and his eyes glazed over. Like my eyes glazed over at work, like God forbid a 6-year-old. So my wife, she's a nurse, super exciting, got tons of questions about what she does. And so I went back, I was like, man, like I can't just live this life of, show up, do this 9 to 5, like not fulfilling for me at all. I'm not scratching any itch that I have. So I started writing a book about a fourth grade spy. I was like, by the time I finish, she'll be about in the fourth grade. So one book turned to 3 pretty quick. Self-published, self-edited, gave a bunch of friends and family to go through, rip it apart, come back. And it's all kind of based on, what would James Bond be like as a kid? What would Jim from The Office, what's his Tom Clancy one that he's in? What would he be like as a kid? Like,
Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan, there you go. What would Jack Ryan be like as a kid? Well, you don't just start off and, go to the army and then you're a killer. What if you started off and you were in 3rd or 4th grade and you went to a spy camp and you started doing this? So that was a lot of fun for me. Towards the end, I was able to start a spinoff, and that would involve my daughter. And I was going to try to go into like this whole spooky angle with it. It's still there, but I don't know if you've ever written, or I don't know. I'm not even a writer, but like once you write and you kind of stop exercising that muscle, it goes downhill pretty quick. So I do need to get back into that. But I like that creativeness that I was able to do with it, and with that, I enjoy a lot of podcasts. My commute's an hour each way. I'll listen to sports, I'll listen to comedy, I'll listen to whatever it might be. But I truly always love if we can get into like the UFOs and the Bigfoots, like the In Search Of, the unsolved mysteries. Like what can we really cover? And with that, the pandemic provided a great opportunity for me to, stop making excuses and to not have the technology to be so fearsome. That like everything was on Zoom. Everything was like, hey, how do we make things work now that, you're just stuck at home? And, I was able to figure this out. And hey, Zoom's pretty easy. And you buy a microphone, and you buy a headset and all this other stuff. And it's only a couple $100. Like you already have a laptop anyway. The investment wasn't as much. I found this to be so fulfilling now. Like all these people that I heard talk on podcasts that I enjoy, I can start getting at least something like that. So it started out that I knew a guy in East Palestine, Ohio, who was like 5 blocks away from that train derailed and blew up. And he moved his whole family out of there. And so I just reached out to him. Like, he wasn't able to talk to anybody, but he was on Facebook and complaining like, hey, we're not getting any help. We're not getting any assistance. My small little podcast was able to project that out a little bit. He had a GoFundMe. And I barely did anything with it. But, he was able to move to North Carolina with his family and get out of there. I had this woman that used to be my neighbor growing up. And she was into CrossFit, like super jacked all the time, and like post stuff on Facebook. And she's doing like 10 high box jumps or whatever else you do, and like rock climbing up like mountains and stuff. And she's a CrossFit practice one day, and she falls to her knees and she can't get up, and she goes to the doctor, and she has stage 4 lung cancer. She never smoked a cigarette in her life or did a drug. And now here she is, like, having this. And she came on to talk about the journey that she was on, the short lifespan that they predicted for her, that she has beaten. She is beyond that now. And she was able to come on and talk about, you know, I guess facing your mortality, like, you know, greatly, like within the next couple of years. And that was a really nice conversation to talk about that, and like the afterlife. And with that, I could just go through, excuse me, I go through, you know, my Twitter feed, whatever I might have. And if people have personal experiences, I reach out to this guy, and he was getting abducted by, in his words, he was getting abducted by UFOs in the astral realm, like as he was dreaming. And I was like, dude, like that's kind of a crazy story. But then you see like the New York Times article comes out, you see Congress is having hearings, you see all this stuff. And it's like, hey, I mean, this is, at least this is his truth, you know, but it was fascinating stuff. And from that, now I try to find people who at least have, I don't want to use like a creator, hey, we're content creators over here, but who at least have like content that they can push. So for 2024, I'm focusing on people who have written books, who either have direct personal experiences. It's a lot of fun to talk to people, to, you know, to shoot the breeze with. But if it's all just like, hey, man, I heard this article, or hey, I heard this podcast, I read this article, I read this article, I heard this podcast, I heard this story. And they're like, hey, man, do you hear the story that I heard? But like, if you're not experiencing it, you know, I kind of found that, hey, all my episodes are great. Don't worry about that. But I did find that there was a part where I was like, you know, are we kind of just here, just, you know, it's all fourth hand accounts, and, you know, that doesn't really make a good episode. That's not something like I'm not sure that I want to listen to more than once or twice. So I stopped it before I went down that slippery slope, and I have a lot of great guests lined up coming up, and it's gonna be exciting.
Well, nice. And so you're embracing the ordinary, or these kind of the unsung heroes, right? People that are just, they're all around us. And are they on Oprah? Are they like selling a book that's getting millions of copies? Well, no, but they still have good stories to tell. And I'm sure that you found too with the podcasting and getting guests, like sometimes you think to yourself, oh, I'd love to get this person, this motivational speaker. But then the people that are like on a way like lower level, so to speak, are a lot more interesting, right? The people that are like the huge big names, like they kind of have their like some of their best days are behind them, maybe, or their material is really refined and like cultivated, and just there's something about the raw randomness. And there's some really good lessons in what you've been saying here. You've been saying that the tools are available to us, right? You have a phone, you have a laptop, camera, microphone. You probably might have even have bought these things because of the pandemic, because of the remote working, and we can put these things to use. If you're someone that watches YouTube, listens to podcasts, we're in this day and age where you can join in as long as you don't stress yourself out about thinking that you need to be a huge hit. You don't need the huge numbers. Just go out there and help the people, like you're helping the friend with at East Palestine and the cancer lady. I mean, there's just some just really cool, like small acts of service. And even so it's like you're kind of embracing these random life adventures. And like the kids book, you're giving me flashbacks to, I think it was like 6 or 7. This was like, you know, late 80s. And there was some kind of like a mail order book you could get. There was like a kid's book about like a rabbit, and they would like plug your name into the story. They like, but it was like $100 plus, right? Because that was the technology back then with the printing. But now with Kindle and self-publishing, I mean, you can put your kids in a story, you can put yourself in a story, and it's as long as you have fun with it, right? And as long as you don't say like, I need to be some huge bestseller, some huge hit, you put yourself out there, you the expression, and then all of that is wrapped into, you said the lesson is work the muscle, right? And put out the content, do the podcasting, do the writing, because if you think about it too long, or if you take too long of a break, then you'll get kind of out of shape, and you'll have to get back into it. So there's something to be said about the habits, the uncomfortableness, and just kind of doing these things and having these fun adventures.
Yeah, I think there's a workout saying that I don't subscribe to, but it's stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And you know, for the writing, I need to get back into getting ready, and that's the hardest part. You know, once you break, you know, you dive into the pool head first, it's not so cold anymore. You dip your toe in, it's pretty cold. You get your feet in, it's still pretty cold. It takes a lot to warm up to that. And if you can just get right in there, which I did when I first started writing, you know, I went. You're talking about this mail order book. So if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, I'm sure you're probably aware of Goosebumps by R.L. Stein. So
Oh
that
yeah.
came out, and I was like in third or fourth grade. and it would come out monthly. And like, you had to have this book. Like, it was amazing. And it was like, oh my God, Night of the Living Dummy and Say Cheese and Die and all these things.
Yeah.
So he would come out like monthly. It's like, man, what's this guy doing? So when I was going to write my books, when I did write them, I looked up his books for how many words were in there, and they averaged about 20,000. So I was like, all right, if I want to write a book in 30 days, if I want to do what this guy is doing, that's going to take about 500 words a day. That'll give me about 15,000. You figure add some fluff or whatever. So, but my goal was if I can get 500 words a day down, and there were times where you're coming up to, the 400 mark, and you're at the end of your day. You're like, I'm not writing anymore. I'm done. It's nighttime. I got to relax. And you're like, Logan was very, 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 very tired. But hey, hit 500. I did it. But then the next day, you'll see yourself blowing past 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 words, and like easily make up for it and go back and you edit out that nonsense that you wrote. But it was just fun to put that in there and to have something that that my son was reading. He's like, oh, I'm the spy, Dad. I'm like, well, no, the kid's just named after you. But hey, man, you want to be the spy? Yeah, you're the spy. That's it. Like, you're there, and to have these adventures and use, I would go through. I really like science and technology. We go back to this UFO thing. They just released Arrow, AARO. I forget. It's like with Congress. They just released a report today that all the UFO stuff that have come out, none of it is alien. They have not found one thing that is alien. It is all Earth technology, either our government or another government. So, as an alien enthusiast, as a UFO enthusiast, I don't agree with that. But hey, as somebody who likes to take real technology and put it into a book or even talk to people about, cutting edge technology, like that's exciting on its own. Like, oh, now we have crafts that the US is saying, if we're, the number one military, you would assume that most of this stuff is ours, that we have crafts that can just hover in air, use propulsion methods that we're not completely familiar with or use in regular aircraft, and then seamlessly transition into the ocean at high speeds. Guess what? My next book that I'm going to write with my daughter, that's science fiction, I'm putting that in there. Like, this isn't made up crazy Star Trek stuff. This is real life stuff that's happening. I find that so exciting.
And also that there's no way that you could 100% come up with these things on their own, right? Because like the best like fiction is pulled from the headlines, and then there's also like probably like some kind of a feedback loop. Like you mentioned Star Trek, and there's this weird like thing where like Star Trek like invented like the warp drive, and it was just like made up thing, and then some scientists thought of like the AccuBeer drive, and then they called it the warp drive, and then the newer Star Trek then like referenced it again. So it's like fiction and fact and fiction again, and it all kinds of blends together. And you think about like some of these stories like the like Philadelphia experiment or Bigfoot, it's like there's the tidbits of what was seen, and then there's the fiction, and then it kind of it like the fiction and fact sort of blend in these weird ways. And it's the blend is kind of fun. Like I didn't really get podcasting that much until like Joe Rogan became big, and Joe Rogan's kind of he's like a mixed bag, but it's fun to see him where he's kind of like uninformed on some stuff and really informed on others, then has a really strong opinion on others, and it just mixes into like it's like having a conversation with your friend, and you're like, well, is it all facts? Is it all opinion? It's kind of this weird middle ground.
Yeah, I love Rogan. I still listen to him. I think before the pandemic, I found him more interesting. That he would have different scientists and people who were on. You have like Cam Hayes or whatever do like the deep breathing. I'm trying to think the guy who just freezes himself all the time. Like that stuff's fascinating. After the pandemic, I feel it's kind of like half of my Twitter feed, and I'm trying to escape, of what's happening. Like
Sure.
I get the government scooping up all our information or whatever it might be. Like, but I also don't need to hear on my podcast. But I still do enjoy his episodes. I think they're amazing. And I the ones I find myself listening to or enjoying the most, he does these fight companions where it's him and like Eddie Bravo, another fighter, and everyone was buddies, and they're just watching the UFC fights, but at the same time they're just BSing about life and about what's going on, and it's just really interesting to hear different people's opinions on. When you're in high school and you have your buddies every day at the lunch table, and this is stuff that you're saying, and as you get older, maybe your water cooler is not as fun anymore, or people you have to like kind of watch what you say. And like, well, I don't know if these people are going to like talking about Bigfoot, or I don't know if these people are going to like talking about whatever the latest thing in the news is. And you find yourself, well, maybe I find myself self-censoring more if I'm not sure of the crowd that I'm around. And it's nice to eavesdrop or almost feel like you're part of that conversation of like the Rogan roundtable and kind of hearing differing opinions that you might hear on the news.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about that. I mean, in a way, you're trying to recapture the nostalgia of high school, which like you might never get that back again, right? There was the time when you all last hung out at the lunch table or last hung out at the playground. You might not even have known that was the last time. But then, yeah, there's the funness there of the fly on the wall. And and again, we're in this day and age where we can pick and choose. We have so many choices, right? It's not just you turn on the TV and there's a handful of talk shows. There's all these podcasters, YouTubes, and when I go and I drop my son off at school in the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of embracing the habit. I record like a quick TikTok. I kind of deliver it with the content. And so that's kind of the work part. And then when I'm driving home after dropping him off, I usually like I dial up some kind of podcast or YouTube. I'm just kind of like instead of listening to music or whatever, there's like a handful of these personalities where like I don't even care that much about what the content, the information is. I'm just like I want to check in on my friend here who has no idea I exist. So it's this weird one-way relationship, but it's like if I go for more than a few days or a few weeks, I'm just like I miss this person who I've never met, and it's just like a weird psychological thing.
No, I definitely understand that. If I go on vacation, so most of my podcasts are done when I'm commuting. So I commute 3 days a week, or if I'm running errands on the weekend, I'm by myself, I'll throw a podcast on. But if I'm on vacation, I really don't listen to podcasts. And when I get back that first day, it's like, I'm like back at work. But then I'll check my podcast feed, and I'm very excited. I'm like, I get to listen to, what's Rogan said? Oh, what's Bill Simmons saying? What's Sam Tripoli on Tinfoil Hat saying? Like, I missed my friends, and apparently they don't know that we exist. We'll get there. Don't worry. We'll make it on their shows.
Yeah, yeah. Once we rise enough to the fame,
Yeah.
and it is cool how you find like you go on Twitter and you find these things, and it reminds me of like there was some comedy show I used to watch, Tim and Eric, where it was just like really bizarre, weird humor, and I guess they would like post on, and it was like this TV show, and they'd post on Craigslist to get people like in town to like play these little parts because they figured like if we hired an actor, you could tell, but they wanted to hire like really bad like community theater actors or like average people to like play in these like comedy skits, and like that's so funny, right? Of just finding the people like maybe I'm sure some of these podcast people that you have, they've never even like been on a podcast before, a lot of them, right? Or it's not their normal thing.
It's not their normal thing. I would say, episode 51 just came out today. So I'm coming up on a year anniversary. There are a couple people who were never on it. And at first they're uncomfortable. And I think, you stare at the camera and you're kind of waiting. But then after like 10 minutes, and, I've never been on a reality show, whatever. They talk about this a lot on reality shows that like after a while you forget that the camera's happening. And that's how you get like some of the horrible stuff happening on reality TV. And they're like, I just didn't realize the camera was there. And that's how I think in podcasting you get into these good conversations. If you're not used to it, you're kind of guarded. It's a one-word answer. If you've never done it, it's like, okay, great for that one-word answer. I can try and record an hour plus podcast here. Can you elaborate a little more, please? And within 10 minutes, the guest is the star of the show. I don't have to talk that much, and it's kind of beneficial to me.
Right. Yeah, you open them up after just kind of wearing them down after a while. And so like what sort of challenges have you come across? Because it's I know like this is kind of like a hobby and you do these kind of things for fun, but there's always difficulties, right? In the like the drama and the growing and finding the time. So like have you struggled in any way in this journey?
So I would say the obstacles that I have in podcasting, I almost embrace and I like them. I like the chaoticness. I like that if an episode's not edited, by Thursday when I'm going to upload to my podcasting host and to my platform host and to YouTube, I'm like, this has to be done by like 10 o'clock at night. This is a lot. And I really like to, so I don't have the Rogan numbers. I don't have the Rogan following it. It's, hey, that guy built his thing from nothing, but it must have been pretty awesome that when you start your podcast, you automatically have like 1 million people listening to you. So this has been a ground up thing where I started with like 5, 10, 20 people. And now my numbers, I'm really proud of the numbers that I put up. And it's kind of amazing, like just all grassroots here. But some of the issues are, you get a guest on. If they've been around the circuit a little bit, they kind of get tired of talking about the same thing. Or they get to those one-word answers. And it's like, I'm really interested in what you have to say. And some of the newer people, if they've never been on a podcast, whatever it is, to try to get them to open up. I did have a guy who just wrote a book, and it was satire on conspiracy theories and UFOs. And as we're talking, he's like, yeah, I'm not sure really why I wrote this book. He's like, the people that it's for don't believe any of this stuff. And I'm on your show, and like, those people don't want to hear it mocked. I was like, yeah, I'm not too sure, where we're going here. But we got a good hour out of it, a good hour plus. He ended up, I would say we wouldn't agree on, most things we didn't agree on, but it was nice to have that adult conversation. I don't want to be in the echo chamber of everybody just thinking like I do. Like, I want to hear, the nonsense of like, how's Bigfoot not exist at all? I'm not even sure if he does or not, but like, just tell me why it's complete BS, and maybe I'll learn something. But if you're just stuck in, this reinforcement of sometimes nonsense, it can be a little much. But that's also why I like to mix in the musicians and just authors of regular books if I can get those people in there too. But some of the obstacles are trying to find a quality guest. Luckily I do have a couple people that I can pull up from old episodes. One guy in my neighborhood, he did stand-up comedy for a few years. He came on and we kind of just BS and covered that, and some synchronicities where like things line up in your life like more than a coincidence. And I pulled him on for my end of the year 2023 podcast. We just recapped like crazy news and crazy news stories. Damar Hamlin, football player, died on the football field, like just kind of crazy, died in a playoff game and brought back to life. There's woman, Tiffany Gomez, who started freaking out on a plane, and she's like yelling like, that MFR isn't real. And like, she became like this little mini celebrity. So some of this stuff was new for him, but I was able to pull him up. And for the end of the year, and like, he has such a great personality and able to joke. So it is nice that I have some people that I can lean on, that if the deadline's coming up and I'm scrambling, or I'm not happy with an episode that I have right now, or it's too many in a row and I don't want to have I don't really want to have like 3 musician episodes in a row. Like, this isn't like a full music podcast. I'm gonna try to mix it up. So it's nice to reach out and have that, but it's also kind of that excitement of like, oh my god, like, how we're gonna land this plane.
And I like the paradox here, right? Like, you do this, it's the wild, weird, and sometimes normal podcast, but you're also like, you stress that about like, I've got to put out the Thursday show. I can't have 3 musicians in a row. So it's like that's a fun paradox, right? Of just the, like, you are having fun, but you're also taking it seriously with some rules. It's like, imagine if there was a bunch of kids in the field kicking a ball around. Well, that's okay. That gets tiring quickly, versus if you like play a game of kickball with like rules and teams, then it might be a little frustrating at first and difficult at first, but then in the end it's more rewarding, right? Because you have what you set out to do and the rules and the structure plus the fun. And then also like the randomness is fun to think about as well, because you think about like just like this middle zone, so to speak. Like, like you think like about like Mystery Science Theater or like bad movies. There's movies that are like, they're bad, but they're not so bad that they're unwatchable, but they're not good that they're too good. And there's funness in just that middle ground of talking about the lady freaking out on the plane and like some of this pop culture ideas.
That was you?
So it looks like Brian dropped out.
Are you
You're
back?
coming back.
I hear you.
That's great timing, because we're about to wrap up.
Okay.
And we're about to plug the Wild, Weird, and Sometimes Normal podcast. And so Brian has some links here. We have a Linktree, that's linktr.ee/wild, weird, and sometimes normal. And that is where you can find out the Wild, Weird, and Sometimes Normal show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts. And as he mentioned, he has all these amazing guests. Like, there was recently Kat Evans, a Chicago playwright and actress, Eric Biggernicks, who was the satirical UFO and conspiracy novel author that he mentioned. And so check this out. If you're a listener of podcasts and you like the randomness and some of these topics sound cool, then and you are curious about Brian's approach and what he has going on, then that is linktr.ee/wild, weird, and sometimes normal. And Brian has rejoined, but I don't hear or see him. So it might be an iPhone issue, but either way, if we don't hear from him in a couple of seconds, we'll wrap things up and tell you to go now to the Wild, Weird, and Sometimes Normal podcast. We are speaking with Brian McCoach. It was wonderful speaking with you, Brian, including the randomness, especially even the unexpectedness of life, such as your side of things dropping out. It was wonderful speaking with you, Brian. Robert Plank from the Marketer of the Day podcast. Go to Wild, Weird, and Sometimes Normal hosted by Brian McCoach.
I apologize. I hear you, and I'm saying thank you for everything. All right, I'm going to jump off.